She was auctioned off for pennies, treated as if her worth could be measured in coins. But when he stepped forward and claimed her with love instead of money, the world learned that some treasures can only be bought with the heart. The summer heat in Copper Creek was nothing compared to the fire of shame burning in her chest as she stood on that makeshift platform, hands bound, eyes cast down at the dusty wooden boards beneath her bare feet. The auctioneer's voice cut through the desert air like a whip crack, each word designed to strip away what little dignity she had left. "What am I bid for this one?" Harold Grimsby bellowed, his tobacco-stained teeth gleaming in a predatory grin. "She's a bit worn around the edges, I'll grant you, but she's got working hands and knows her place. Starting bid 50 cents. The crowd of rough men erupted in cruel laughter. 50 cents. Half a dollar. Less than the price of a bottle of whiskey or a decent meal. That's what they thought she was worth. "Hell, Grimsby," called out a grizzled rancher with a beer gut. "I wouldn't pay 50 cents for a broken-down mule. 25 cents, and that's being generous." More laughter. More jeers. Each comment hit her like a physical blow, reinforcing what she'd been told her entire life, that she was worthless, disposable, nothing more than damaged goods that no decent person would want. But in the back of the crowd, a tall figure in a worn leather coat watched with different eyes. Thaddeus Ravencrest had seen enough auctions in his 32 years to know the difference between livestock and human dignity being stripped away piece by piece. His jaw clenched as he listened to grown men debate the worth of a woman like she was a piece of furniture. He studied her face, what he could see of it beneath the curtain of tangled auburn hair. There was something in the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself despite the humiliation, that spoke of strength buried beneath layers of pain. She wasn't broken, not completely. Not yet. 25 cents, Grimsby announced, raising his gavel. "Do I hear 30? Come now, gentlemen. Surely someone needs a kitchen maid, or a $1,000. The words dropped into the crowd like a stone into still water, creating ripples of shocked silence that spread outward until even the horses seemed to pause their shuffling. Every head turned toward the back of the gathering, where Thaddeus Ravencrest stepped forward, his hand reaching into his coat to withdraw a leather pouch heavy with coin. The auctioneer's mouth fell open. I beg your pardon?" $1,000, Caspian repeated, his voice steady as granite. "Cash. Right now." On the platform, she lifted her head for the first time since the bidding began, her green eyes wide with disbelief and something that might have been hope. If you're already feeling the weight of this moment, let me know in the comments below, because what happens next will change everything. Harold Grimsby's face turned 3 shades of red, before settling on a mottled purple that suggested either apoplexy or pure greed. He wiped his forehead with a dirty handkerchief, his eyes fixed on the leather pouch in Caspian's weathered hands. "Did you say 1,000? Grimsby's voice cracked like a teenage boy's. "For her?" "That's right." Caspian's boots thudded against the packed earth as he approached the platform, the crowd parting before him like he was Moses walking through the Red Sea. $1,000 in gold coin, more than you'll make in the next 10 auctions combined. The woman on the platform stared at him with a mixture of terror and confusion. In her experience, men who paid premium prices expected premium services, the kind that left scars on both body and soul. She'd learned to read the hunger in men's eyes, the cruel intentions hidden behind false kindness. But this stranger's gaze held something different, something that almost looked like respect. "You're either drunk or touched in the head, mister," laughed Buck Morrison, a cattle baron known for his temper and his wandering hands. "That girl ain't worth $10, let alone 1,000. She's been passed around more than a bottle at a church social. What could you possibly want with used goods like that?" Thaddeus's hand moved to the Colt .45 at his hip, a subtle gesture that made the crowd take a collective step backward. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried to every ear present. I'd be real careful about how you speak of a lady in my presence, Morrison. Real careful. The tension in the air grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Buck Morrison was no coward, but he was smart enough to recognize a man who'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to kill again. He raised his hands in mock surrender, his laughter nervous now. Easy there, Ravencrest. No offense meant. Just seems like awful high stakes for a game of charity. This isn't charity. Thaddeus's eyes never left the woman's face as he spoke. This is justice. Grimsby, sensing the deal of a lifetime slipping through his fingers, banged his gavel with desperate enthusiasm. Sold to Mr. Ravencrest for $1,000, cash on delivery. The pouch hit the auctioneer's palm with a satisfying thunk, gold coins spilling out like liquid sunlight. Thaddeus stepped onto the platform and began untying the rough rope that bound her wrists, his touch gentle but impersonal. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, his voice meant for her ears alone. She hesitated, as if the question itself was a trap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse from disuse and shame. They just call me girl. Or worse things." Caspian's jaw tightened, but his hands remained steady as he finished freeing her. "Well, they won't be calling you anything anymore. You're under my protection now." The crowd watched in stunned silence as he helped her down from the platform, his coat draped around her shoulders to shield her from their staring eyes. As they walked away together, whispers erupted like wildfire behind them, some calling him a fool, others a saint, most simply bewildered by what they'd witnessed. None of them understood that Thaddeus Ravencrest had just made the best investment of his life. The ride to Thaddeus's homestead passed in heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic clip-clop of his horse's hooves and the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. She sat behind him on the saddle, her body rigid with tension, expecting at any moment for him to reveal his true intentions, to pull off the trail into some secluded grove where he could claim what he'd purchased. But the trail continued straight and true, winding through stands of ponderosa pine and across meadows painted gold with late summer wildflowers. The afternoon sun was kind to the high country, casting everything in warm honey light that should have been beautiful, should have been peaceful. Instead, she felt like a condemned prisoner being led to execution. "You can relax," Thaddeus said without turning around, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact. "I'm taking you home. My home, where you'll be safe." Safe. The word tasted foreign on her tongue, like trying to speak a language she'd never learned. Men don't pay $1,000 for safety. She felt his shoulders tense beneath the worn fabric of his shirt, and for a moment she thought she'd pushed too far, spoken too boldly. In her experience, men didn't like being questioned or challenged, especially by property they'd just purchased. "You're right," he said finally. "They don't. But I didn't buy you." "Then what would you call it?" "I call it paying your debt to freedom." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a campfire, heavy with meaning she didn't dare hope to understand. Freedom wasn't something that happened to women like her. Freedom was for people who mattered, who had names instead of labels, who possessed value beyond what their bodies could provide. When the Ravencrest homestead came into view, she couldn't suppress a sharp intake of breath. It wasn't a grand mansion or a sprawling cattle empire, but it was solid, well-maintained, and beautiful in its simplicity. A 2-story house built from local stone and timber, with a wraparound porch that suggested peaceful evenings and quiet conversations. Outbuildings that spoke of prosperity, earned through honest work rather than inheritance or exploitation. It looked like the kind of place where a person could belong. Thaddeus helped her down from the horse with the same careful courtesy he'd shown at the auction, his hands strong but respectful, never lingering where they shouldn't. She stood uncertainly by the porch steps, still wrapped in his coat, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Go on inside," he said, nodding toward the front door. There's a wash basin in the back room. Clean clothes in the wardrobe upstairs. Take whatever fits. Take your time. She stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception or hidden meaning. This had to be a game of some kind, an elaborate prelude to humiliation. Nobody gave without expecting something in return. Nobody rescued for the sake of rescuing. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it, raw and desperate. Why did you do it? Why did you pay so much for someone like me? Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he watched clouds gather over the mountain peaks. When he finally looked at her, she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch a pain so deep and old that it had become part of him, like a scar that never quite healed. Because, he said simply, everyone deserves to know what it feels like to be worth something. That evening, as fireflies began their ancient dance in the meadow grass, she emerged from the house, transformed. The clean dress, simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, fit as if it had been made for her. Her hair, washed and braided, caught the last rays of sunlight like burnished copper. But it was more than the external changes that struck Caspian as he looked up from tending his horses. There was something in her posture, the way she carried herself, that spoke of dignity slowly being restored. She found him by the corral, brushing down his mare with long, practiced strokes. The rhythm was meditative, peaceful, in a way that seemed to suit him better than the cold fury he'd displayed at the auction. "I never asked your name," she said, settling herself on the bottom rail of the fence, careful to keep distance between them. "Thaddeus Ravencrest." He continued his grooming, not looking at her directly. "Most folks just call me Thad." "Thaddeus." She tested the name, found it solid and strong on her tongue. "That's different." "My mother had unusual tastes in names. Said she wanted something that would make people remember me." "I think people would remember you regardless." The comment earned her a quick glance, something that might have been the ghost of a smile flickering across his weathered features. "You're probably right about that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the horses move restlessly in the gathering dusk. Finally, she gathered the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her chest all afternoon. "Why did you really do it? At the auction, I mean. Don't tell me it was just about everyone deserving worth. There's more to it than that." Thaddeus set down his brush and leaned against the fence post, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the horizon. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief, old regrets. "Had a sister once. Rebecca. Sweet girl, kind heart, too trusting for her own good. She fell in love with a man who promised her the world and delivered her hell instead. Sold her to pay off gambling debts when she was barely 18. The words fell like stones into still water, each one creating ripples of understanding. She didn't need him to finish the story, to know how it ended. Stories like Rebecca's rarely had happy endings. "I was working cattle drives then," Caspian continued, "gone for months at a time, chasing dreams of my own fortune. By the time I got word of what happened, she was already." He stopped, his throat working as if the words were too heavy to speak. "I never found her. Never even learned where they took her. So you decided to save me instead." "I decided to do what I should have done for her. What I failed to do when it mattered." In town, word of Thaddeus's $1,000 mistake was spreading like wildfire through every saloon and general store. Men shook their heads in disbelief, women whispered behind gloved hands, and children listened wide-eyed to stories of the cowboy who'd paid a fortune for damaged goods. "Fool's throwing his money away on a lost cause," declared Pete Williams, the town banker, over whiskey at Murphy's saloon. "That girl's been broken since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. Ain't no amount of kindness gonna fix what's wrong with her." But back at the homestead, as stars began to pierce the darkening sky, she found herself studying the man who'd changed the entire course of her life with a single bid. There was something about him, a steadiness, a quiet strength, that made her want to believe in the impossible. "Can I trust you?" she asked suddenly, the words escaping before she could call them back. Thaddeus turned to look at her fully, his dark eyes serious in the lamplight spilling from the house windows. "I reckon that's something you'll have to decide for yourself," he said. "But I'll tell you this, I've never broken a promise to a woman, and I don't intend to start now." 3 weeks passed, like a slow awakening from a long, dark dream. Each morning brought small revelations: the luxury of washing with soap that smelled like lavender instead of lye, the wonder of eating meals at a table instead of scraping scraps from others' plates, the foreign concept of privacy in a room with a door that locked from the inside. Thaddeus kept his word about giving her space and time. He worked his land during the day, mending fences, tending cattle, preparing for the coming winter, while she explored the boundaries of her new world. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, with rooms that spoke of a man who valued beauty as well as function. Books lined the shelves in the main room, their worn spines suggesting frequent reading. It was the kind of home she'd dreamed about during the darkest hours of her old life, when escape seemed impossible and hope was just another word for foolishness. On a Thursday morning, while Thaddeus was in the north pasture checking on a pregnant mare, she finally found the courage to speak about her past. He'd come in for lunch, his shirt damp with honest sweat, and found her standing by the kitchen window with tears streaming down her face. "What is it?" His voice was immediately gentle, concerned. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to trust her voice for a moment. When she finally spoke, the words came out in a rush, like water bursting through a damaged dam. "My name," she whispered, "my real name is Rosalie. Rosalie May Sinclair. Nobody's called me that in so long, I almost forgot it was mine." The admission hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Thaddeus set down his hat and moved slowly toward her, his approach careful and unthreatening. "Rosalie." He spoke the name like a prayer, like something precious that needed to be handled with care. "It's beautiful. It suits you. My mama gave it to me," she continued, the floodgates now fully open. "Before she died, before Papa started drinking, before everything went wrong. She said I was her little rose, and that no matter what happened, I should never forget that roses are meant to bloom, not wither." The story came out in pieces: how her father had lost their farm to drink and debt, how he'd sold her to the first man who offered cash, how she'd been passed from owner to owner like a piece of livestock, until she'd ended up on that auction block in Copper Creek. Thaddeus listened without judgment, without interruption, his presence steady as bedrock. When she finished, exhausted by the weight of sharing secrets she'd kept buried for so long, he handed her a clean handkerchief and spoke with quiet conviction. "That's all behind you now, Rosalie. You'll never be property again, never be treated as less than the remarkable woman you are. I give you my word on that." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Rosalie felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: the possibility of peace. "Thaddeus?" she said softly. "Yes? Thank you for giving me back my name." He reached across the space between their chairs and squeezed her hand gently, briefly. "Thank you for trusting me with it." Autumn arrived like a gentle blessing, painting the aspen groves in shades of gold and crimson that took Rosalie's breath away. She'd never had the luxury of noticing seasons before survival, had been a day-to-day proposition that left no room for beauty or wonder. But here, in the sanctuary of Thaddeus's ranch, she discovered the simple joy of watching leaves dance in the mountain wind. Her days had fallen into a rhythm that felt almost like normalcy. She cooked meals that were shared rather than stolen, tended a garden that would feed them both through the winter, and slowly, carefully, began to help with the gentler aspects of ranch work. Thaddeus never asked her to do anything, never demanded labor in exchange for shelter, but she found herself wanting to contribute, to prove her worth through more than just gratitude. It was on a crisp October morning, while teaching her to ride his gentlest mare, that everything changed. "Easy now," Thaddeus murmured, his hand steady on the bridle as Rosalie settled nervously into the saddle. Duchess here is older than both of us put together and twice as wise. She won't let you fall." "I've never—" Rosalie's hands shook as she gripped the reins. "I've never been allowed to ride before. Always had to walk, no matter how far." "Well, now you'll never have to walk anywhere you don't want to." He handed her the reins with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Freedom means choices, Rosalie. Choices about where you go, how you get there, and who you travel with." As Duchess began a gentle walk around the corral, Rosalie felt something burst open in her chest, a feeling so unfamiliar she couldn't name it at first. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. She laughed, and the sound was like silver bells in the mountain air. Thaddeus stopped walking and stared at her, his expression shifting to something deeper, more complex. The laughter died in her throat as she recognized the look in his eyes, not the predatory hunger she'd learned to fear, but something infinitely more dangerous. "Love." "Don't," she whispered, pulling Duchess to a halt. "Please, don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I'm something precious. Like I'm worth loving." She slid down from the saddle, her legs unsteady. "I'm not. I can't be what you want me to be." Thaddeus caught her hands as she tried to brush past him, his touch gentle but insistent. "And what do you think I want you to be?" "Pure. Innocent. Someone who deserves a good man's love." The words came out bitter, self-hating. "I'm not any of those things, Caspian. You paid for damaged goods, and no amount of kindness will change that." His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You listen to me, Rosalie May Sinclair. What was done to you doesn't define you. Your past doesn't dictate your worth. You are brave, and kind, and beautiful, and any man lucky enough to earn your love would be the richest soul alive." "You don't understand." "I understand that you've been told lies your whole life by people who wanted to break you down, make you small. But I see the truth. I see your strength, your grace, your capacity for forgiveness. I see the woman who tends wounded animals, who laughs at terrible jokes, who makes this house feel like a home for the first time since my mother died." Tears streamed down her face, but she couldn't look away from the fierce tenderness in his expression. "I don't know how to be loved." "Then let me teach you," he whispered. "Let me show you what it means to be cherished, protected, valued for exactly who you are." That night, as autumn wind rattled the windows and firelight painted dancing shadows on the walls, Rosalie lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her room. Beyond her door, she could hear Thaddeus moving quietly through the house, banking the fire, checking locks, performing the nightly rituals of a man who took his role as protector. For the first time in her life, she found herself wanting to trust in forever. But forever was a luxury she'd never been able to afford, and she wasn't sure she knew how to start believing in it now. The woman who'd been sold for pennies was falling in love with the man who'd paid a fortune to set her free, and that terrified her more than anything she'd ever faced. Word of Thaddeus and Rosalie's unusual arrangement had spread beyond Copper Creek, carried by traveling merchants and gossiping neighbors, until it reached the ears of men who saw opportunity in other people's business. Chief among them was Silas Garrett, a wealthy rancher from the next county over who'd built his fortune on the backs of desperate people and questionable deals. Garrett rode into Copper Creek on a gray November morning with his retinue of hired guns and an attitude that suggested he owned whatever he touched. He made straight for Murphy's saloon, where he knew he'd find the kind of audience that appreciated his particular brand of crude humor. "Heard tell there's a fool in these parts," Garrett announced, slapping silver dollars on the bar with theatrical flair. "Some lovesick cowboy who paid $1,000 for used goods at auction. That true?" The saloon fell quiet, the kind of charged silence that preceded either violence or entertainment. Men who'd been laughing about Thaddeus behind his back suddenly found themselves uncomfortable discussing him with a stranger, particularly one who radiated the kind of casual cruelty that made decent folks uneasy. Might be true, allowed Pete Williams carefully. Though I reckon that's Ravencrest's business, not yours. Garrett's laugh was like breaking glass. Everything's my business when there's profit involved. See, I've got a proposition for this Ravencrest fellow. I'll pay him double what he spent $2,000 cash for that little dove he's been keeping warm. That's good business sense, turning 100% profit on a bad investment. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Even the men who'd criticized Thaddeus's decision understood the insult implicit in Garrett's offer. Rosalie wasn't merchandise to be bought and sold, whatever her past might have been. Don't think Mr. Ravencrest would be interested in that kind of deal, said Tom Murphy, the saloon keeper, his voice carefully neutral. And I'd suggest you be careful how you speak about the lady. Thaddeus has got a long reach and a longer memory when it comes to protecting what's his. His? Garrett's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. Thought we were talking about property, not a person. And property can always be sold to the highest bidder. The confrontation that followed was inevitable. Word reached Thaddeus within hours, carried by Tom Murphy's youngest boy, who rode hell for leather to the Ravencrest ranch with news of the stranger's insulting offer. Rosalie watched from the kitchen window as Thaddeus received the message, saw his face transform from peaceful to deadly in the space of a heartbeat. "Stay in the house," he told her, his voice cold as winter wind. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, don't come outside until I tell you it's safe." "Thaddeus, please. This isn't about you, Rosalie. This is about respect, about the principle that some things in this world are not for sale at any price." She watched him ride toward town like an avenging angel, his coat billowing behind him, his face set in lines of implacable determination. Part of her wanted to follow, to somehow intervene before violence could erupt. But a larger part, the part that was still learning to trust in protection, stayed where she was, understanding that sometimes love had to be defended with force. The confrontation at Murphy's saloon was brief but decisive. Garrett, for all his bluster and hired guns, hadn't counted on facing a man who'd learned to kill in the service of his country and hadn't forgotten the lessons. When the dust settled, 2 of Garrett's men were nursing broken bones. Garrett himself was face down in the dirt, with Thaddeus's boot on his neck, and the assembled crowd had a clear understanding of exactly how far the quiet rancher would go to protect what mattered to him. "You listen to me, and you listen good," Thaddeus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the saloon. "That woman is under my protection, and my protection means she's not for sale, not for trade, not for discussion. Any man who suggests otherwise will answer to me personally. Are we clear?" Garrett's muffled agreement was barely audible, but it was enough. He and his remaining men left Copper Creek that same day, nursing their wounds and their wounded pride in equal measure. But as Thaddeus rode home through the gathering dusk, he carried with him the knowledge that their troubles were far from over. Men like Garrett didn't forget humiliation easily, and they rarely gave up on something they wanted without a fight. The price of loving Rosalie was going to be higher than the $1,000 he'd paid at auction. But as he thought of her waiting for him at home, her green eyes bright with worry and hope, he knew he'd pay whatever it cost to keep her safe. Some things, after all, were truly priceless. The storm that hit the high country in late November was the kind that old-timers talked about for decades. Afterward, a howling demon of wind and snow that turned the familiar world into something alien and deadly. It struck without warning, catching both man and beast unprepared for its fury. Thaddeus had been checking the fence line in the north pasture when the first winds hit, driving snow so thick he couldn't see his own hands in front of his face. His horse stumbled on the treacherous footing and went down hard, pinning Thaddeus's leg beneath his considerable weight. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, made worse by the bitter cold that numbed his hands and face. Back at the house, Rosalie watched the western sky with growing alarm. She knew Thaddeus well enough to understand that he wouldn't seek shelter until he was certain his animals were safe. As the hours passed and the storm intensified, fear gnawed at her stomach like a living thing. When full darkness fell and he still hadn't returned, she made a decision that would have seemed impossible just months before. She wrapped herself in every warm piece of clothing she could find, saddled Duchess with shaking hands, and rode out into the teeth of the storm to find him. The search felt hopeless from the beginning. The world had become a white void, where direction was meaningless and distance impossible to judge. But she pressed on, driven by a love she was finally ready to acknowledge, following instincts she'd never known she possessed. She found him 3 hours after full dark, slumped against a fence post, with his horse standing protectively over him, both covered in snow that spoke of long exposure. Thaddeus was conscious but fading, his lips blue with cold, his injured leg twisted at an angle that made her stomach clench. "Found you," she said, dropping down beside him in the snow. "I found you." Getting him onto the Duchess was a nightmare of pain and determination. But Rosalie had learned to do impossible things, had discovered reserves of strength she'd never known existed. Inch by painful inch, she maneuvered him into the saddle, then climbed up behind him to keep him upright for the journey home. The ride back tested every ounce of her newfound courage. Thaddeus drifted in and out of consciousness, his weight threatening to pull them both from the saddle. But Rosalie held on with fierce determination, guided by love and an iron will that refused to let the man who'd saved her life perish in the wilderness. When they finally reached the house, she half carried, half dragged him inside. She built up the fire until the main room blazed with heat and worked through the night to bring feeling back to his frozen limbs. Word of the rescue spread through Copper Creek like wildfire. The same people who'd whispered about her past now spoke of her bravery, her skill, her fierce devotion to the man who'd given her a chance at redemption. "You saved my life," he said one evening as she changed his bandages. "You saved mine first," she replied simply. "I just returned the favor." In risking everything to bring him home safely, Rosalie had proven she was worth exactly what Thaddeus had always claimed. More than gold. More than any price that could be measured in mere money. Spring returned to the high country with the soft promise of new beginnings. And with it came a question that had been building in Thaddeus's heart through the long winter months of recovery. His leg had healed, clean and strong testament to Rosalie's skilled care, but more importantly, something fundamental had shifted between them during those dark weeks, when life and death had hung in the balance. They were no longer rescuer and rescued, no longer the man who'd paid $1,000 and the woman who'd been bought for pennies. They were partners, equals, two souls who'd found in each other something worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. On a morning when wildflowers painted the meadows in shades of purple and gold, Thaddeus found Rosalie in the garden, her hands dark with rich earth as she planted vegetables for their second summer together. The sight of her hair gleaming in the sunlight, humming softly to herself, completely at peace in this place they'd built together, stopped him in his tracks. "Rosalie," he said, and something in his voice made her look up with sudden attention. He knelt beside her in the dark soil, heedless of his clean clothes, and took her dirt-stained hands in his. "I have something to ask you, and I need you to know that whatever your answer, nothing changes between us." Her green eyes widened with understanding, hope, and just a touch of the old fear that still sometimes whispered lies in her darkest moments. "That day at the auction, I thought I was buying your freedom. But somewhere along the way, you bought my heart not with money, but with courage, with kindness, with the simple miracle of being exactly who you are." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band, not ornate or expensive, but honest and pure, like the love it represented. "Rosalie May Sinclair, I'm not asking you to be my property or my possession. I'm asking you to be my partner, my equal, my wife. Will you marry me? Not because you owe me anything, but because we choose each other, freely and completely." Tears traced silver paths down her cheeks as she stared at the ring, at this man who'd given her back her name, her dignity, her belief in the possibility of happily ever after. "I'm not the same woman you bought at that auction," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "You're infinitely better. You're the woman who saved my life, who brought laughter to this house, who taught me that love isn't about owning someone, it's about freeing them to become everything they were meant to be." "Yes," she said, and the word carried all the weight of a soul finally ready to believe in forever. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not because you paid for me, but because you saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself." They were married a month later, in the little church in Copper Creek. As they exchanged vows, Thaddeus spoke words that echoed through the church. "You are my most precious treasure, not because I paid for you, but because you chose to trust me with your heart." As they rode home under a canopy of stars, Rosalie reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Paying so much for someone everyone said was worthless?" Thaddeus pulled her closer. "Worth isn't measured in dollars. True value lies in courage, in kindness, in the capacity to love and be loved. By that measure, you're the richest woman alive." They'd started their story with a transaction pennies offered, a fortune paid. But they were ending it with something far more valuable, a love that couldn't be bought, sold, or measured by any earthly standard. If you thought this story was powerful, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video. Another tale of love, conquering impossible odds that will leave you believing in the magic of second chances.